Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
I want to thank Danny for being so kind when he said he needed some strong backs for this later today. He left out the main part, the weak minds that go with it. Thank you, Danny, for leaving that part out. But I'll be glad to try to help you. I'm sure them other fellows back there will help us too. So we'll take care of it today. James, of course, called and asked me if I could try to fill in for him. I told him I'd be happy to. And Jerry had actually come to me, and I told originally, and I said, well, see if you can find somebody else. I've been teaching on a different level in there with the kids, you know. I got, well, the kids and the young adults. So, because sometimes we end up with a class of all age groups in there. I mean, the little ones up to myself, the ones that's on the verge of being worn out. And so I try to keep it pretty light when we're in there, you know. And we had actually, for the past, it's been a while now, we'd started in the book of Mark. And our objective, we just would sit down each morning and we'd try to go through the book of Mark and we'd talk about the miracles of Jesus. And it seems to be a subject that, you know, like the older folks, the young adults, and even when the little ones are in there, that seems to bring interest to everybody in there. And or at least I felt like it did anyway. So that's how we've gotten to the point where we're going to be at today in Mark chapter 10 is where I'll end up reading from today. And week before last, or the Sunday before last, Travis asked me how our Sunday school class go. I said, we done pretty good until we got bogged down in Perea, and I kind of chuckled about it. And, of course, I didn't have time to talk to him about it. But reason I said that is a lot of times we'll look up names of towns or people that during our lesson, try to look it up in the concordance and see where the root meaning comes from. And because a lot of times I feel like these lessons to be learned just by seeing what the meaning of some of the people's names is in the Bible, the name of some of the towns, because the name of the people and towns in the Bible are not just abstract, just something that's made up. You get in your concordance and you look and, you know, I'm sure somebody even like the Sea of Galilee or and the nearby town there on, I think it's Antioch or something. I can't pronounce a lot of these words, but I'm sure everybody in here probably already knows what what Galilee and the name of that Gennesaret means or what it's derived from. I mean, I'm sure. But if you don't, it's harp-like. So when you look at the Sea of Galilee on a map, it's shaped like a harp. And so that's kind of one of those little side lessons that you get. But it also makes me wonder, I guess there's a mountain tall enough around there that somebody can stand on it and see the Sea of Galilee and see that it's kind of shaped like a harp. I don't know. But anyway, there's a lot of little things to be learned, and we try to look that up in our class sometimes. And we looked up that word Perea. Is when I told Travis we got bogged down. We flipped over in the big concordance there, and I couldn't find it. And we kept flipping around. I think Will looked in his concordance in his Bible, and we couldn't find it. So anyway, by the time we rolled around there, the whistle blew. The class was over, so I was going to look up Perea and kind of see what Perea meant or where that name come from. You know, how many times you read over stuff in the Bible and it just kind of flows and you don't think about it. You get the main point, but you miss a lot of little stuff, or I guess is what I'm trying to say. But so I got to thinking too, you know, a lot of times I'm a visual learner myself, and I'm not very capable of learning much anyway. I'm just going to be honest with you. That's one thing is, you know, I'm limited there, and I realize that. I'm not going to toot my own horn and say I'm some kind of brain surgeon when I'm not. But I'm like everybody else, have ups and downs, and I enjoy life. I enjoy my family, and I enjoy my church family, and I like to be here. So I'm up here this morning, you know, I'm trying to do something good for the church family here, I feel like, until Lamar gets back, who I look at as a real teacher and not myself. I try to do what we can in our Sunday school class with the kids, but I respect Lamar's teaching. I know he studies thoroughly, and he gets into it in great detail. And it's been a blessing all these, what has it been, Leah, 20 years we've been here, on and off when I can come in here and listen to Lamar teach. To have a teacher that good for that long and be able to see it, it's a blessing in itself. And he's been here that long doing that. And he was doing it well before I ever came here too, I'm sure. So, but anyway, another thing, reason I got on visual learning, and I think I got it in my notes, we'll get over here in a minute, is in explaining some of these, when we talk about these places, and, Jesus was moving around a lot in the four Gospels, which I personally look as historical eyewitness accounts of Jesus' time here on earth. That's the way I look at these Gospels. Not something that, what do they call that, I guess, got a different meaning. I take it literally. When they say he healed a blind man, I believe Jesus healed a blind man. The man couldn't walk, and Jesus made it to where he could walk. I believe that's the way it was. And when one was raised from the dead, I believe it was literally from the dead, not half dead or in a coma or something like that. I take it literally. And so I look at the Gospels as eyewitness accounts and historical too. And so here we go. The Perea is what got me started here on this lesson. And what I found out is it's a territory. And the reason it come about that this was our word, because in chapter 10, verse 1, I'm going to read, and I have to take my glasses off to read, guys, so you have to bear with me. And he arose from thence and cometh into the coast of Judea by the farther side of Jordan, and the people resort unto him again, and as he was wont, he taught them again. All right, into the coast of Judea by the farther side of the Jordan. All right. Well, of course, if you listen to the news in the world today, sounds like the River Jordan's only got one bank. That's the West Bank, ain't it? You never notice that they don't ever mention the East Bank, do they? No, they don't. But anyway, kind of ground you in a little spot there. That East Bank is going to be where Perea's at. It's from olden times. I mean, it's not called that now, I'm sure. But during this Roman occupation, is what I want to call it, of the Holy Land, is the Romans had created some territories, had divided up the Holy Land right there is what they had done. And Perea was one of them. We'll call it a territory, which is the way they looked at it. And it's on that east side of the Jordan River. It means country beyond. It's kind of how it breaks down there too. So, and something that's key to remember here in the future as we move forward, it was controlled by Herod Antipas. And because Jesus is going through this area, and if you guys remember, Herod Antipas is not a really nice guy. Kind of goes back to, the first Herod, they call him Herod the Great. I really don't know why anybody even sticks with that anymore. I'd call him Herod the Evil One or something. But he was not a very nice person either. So, but I guess history wants to call him great, so we'll stick with that. But Israel during this time, of course, ruled by the Romans. That's how these areas got named, these territories: Galilee, Perea, Judea. Those are the territories, and I'll get to that here in the future. And you got to look at these people, these Jewish people at this time. They've been ruled for a very long time by peoples that are not Jewish. We know the kingdom was divided, but we go back to the time of Solomon there, and of course, Solomon had some problems there. I feel led to the whole dividing of the kingdom right after that. And the northern part ended up being overtaken first. So they've been in occupation all the way since not long after Solomon was king. You got to take a few years there, but it's not been, it wasn't that long after Solomon was king. And that's when the nation was at its greatest. Solomon built the temple, and David had gathered all the pieces, and Solomon put it together, and it was known the world over. And, people from all over the world wanted to go see King Solomon and all that. Well, anyway, it wasn't long after that the Assyrians come in, and so they kind of take control. And then I think after the Assyrians, the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar, remember him? He comes in. And all this time, it's trials, and it's turmoil, it's war, it's rough times. And through all this period, up until now, the occupation of the Romans, of course, after the Babylonians, we had the Persians come in. And then after the Persians, you had the Greeks come in under Alexander the Great. And then you had that 300-year period there between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and they were still under occupation. Ends up the Romans is in control of them now. And I think, can't we see why a nation, a peoples, of what was remaining of them there? You got to remember, some of these countries that took them over had practices of bringing in foreigners, populating the land, taking the best of the people and hauling them back to their countries, like Babylon. I think that's how Daniel may have ended up back away from there, if I'm correct, So this nation, man, it was punished bad by foreign nations. The nation of Israel was punished bad. And that goes to the mindset of the Jewish people here during this time. I think, if you had God's word there, that's that up to that point, the Old Testament, and I call it the Old Testament. There's some other word there for it. I'm just going to refer to it as the Old Testament. It's the old books of the Bible, the beginning. They were looking for a Savior. They were expecting somebody to get them out of this shape. It was miserable, and I could see that for a lot of people there. And, of course, their idea of a Savior probably, I think we all know that is what they got. They weren't expecting that. They wanted the cowboy with the guns blazing, so to say, and come in and clean house and return them to their former glory of when the temple was at its best. That's what they had in their mind. That's what they were expecting. And of course, us, we know better that's not what they received. And during this time, Romans, the Roman control, they used locals to rule the people that was there. So that's how we ended up with Herod the Great, who was in charge when Jesus was born there. And he was an Edomite. And pretty much, I think he was hated by the Jewish people at that time. I don't think he was very well regarded. And thinking back, Edomites, I think they were descendants of the Esau. I could be wrong on that. Kind of a mountain people there. And if I got that one wrong, y'all can check behind me. It may come up on that. I can't. Is that right? Okay. Yeah. This comes from one of the lessons in the past that come to me there, so I was thinking about that. And old Herod the Great, he knew how to make the Romans happy. If he had one characteristic, he'd throw these big celebrations and stuff and keep the Romans happy. And he had a lot of building projects going on. A lot of this stuff I know you know, but it's interesting to me. And for the young folks that's in the back who may not know a lot of this stuff, I think it grounds them in actual history and what's real. And if you know what's real and if you know what's history, somebody trying to change your mind about what the Bible has to say, if you really know what the historical facts and truth are, it makes it hard for somebody to twist that stuff around on you. It helps you. It helps you. So, a lot of this stuff I know you folks up here on the front know this already. So, but I've got two young ones back there that don't have a clue what an Edomite probably is. And they probably don't realize, even how wide the Dead Sea and stuff. So we'll get to some of that here in a minute. But the historical parts, I want them they need to hear that and some of the history about that. It kind of brings it all together because it makes it, to me, it makes it to where you can understand it more instead of just like pulling a subject out and just, and then there's nothing attached to it, nothing to ground it. It seems to me like you forget it easier. But if you can attach some history to it and so forth, that's why I'm trying to do that for them. And of course, when Herod the Great died, his so-called little kingdom, I guess what you want to call it, what the Romans had him in charge of, it ended up kind of being divided, I believe. And of course, his son, Herod Antipas, was over here in charge in Perea. And we know he wasn't a very nice guy because probably his most infamous act, I'm sure somebody in here can fill me in on that, was John the Baptist. I think ain't he the one who ended up had John the Baptist, he gave the order. I mean, he kind of set himself up for that, and I'm sure everybody in here knows that story. But, all right. And, of course, where we're at now, we've been going through these miracles with our class, and we've been to Jerusalem. We've been up through Samaria, and we've been back. And guess where we're headed back now at this chapter in Mark? We're headed back to Jerusalem. And this is going to be the final trip to Jerusalem. And and Jesus is going that way, and the way I kind of read it, kind of understand it, they're with a crowd and a group going there. So this time of year, you're having the total blank, not services, but ritual, not somebody say it loud. No, it's when they all gather. It's yeah, it's one of the. Yeah, festivals. Yeah, it's one of the festivals. We're getting down there. Yeah, there we go. I just lost it. That's what happens if you don't make a lot of notes for me. Like I said, I'm not telling you I'm a brain surgeon. I forget stuff pretty easy up here. All right. But anyway, these, they're supposed to go down to Jerusalem. And for these, if all possible, they're supposed to go. So, there's crowds going down there. And it's not like they're flying, guys. They're on the MARTA train headed down there. All the way from Galilee down to Jerusalem is what, maybe 70 miles? Anybody, I'm sure somebody's in here has been to Israel. Nobody? Yeah, Nancy has. Carol has. Well, 70 miles from Galilee down to Jerusalem probably. The whole country is what, maybe 100 some miles long? Yeah, something like that. So, now, I've did some walking before, but these people did a lot of walking. And what's the farthest anybody has ever walked in a day's time, I think? Now, some of the older folks might have done a lot of walking. Anybody got, I don't know if I've ever walked 5 miles in a day nonstop to somewhere. I couldn't tell you that. 5 miles? Kenny's went 5 miles. Is it pretty exhausting? Yeah, it's pretty exhausting. So you got to travel from, if you lived in the north, if you didn't live close to Jerusalem, you had to walk to Jerusalem. I guess unless you had a donkey, you might could have rode a donkey or something down there. I don't know, but anyway, he's headed down with a group, and traveling in groups, I guess, is going to be safer too. I mean, you would think so. I don't know how bad crime was in them days, but you would think a group of pilgrims going down to the festivals, and not to mention the fact that Jesus was Jesus and he had crowds following him anyway. So, anyway, and he's going through this Perea, and when you read when you study some of this, they seem to think that maybe he was going down through there to avoid Samaria, or maybe indirectly because the pilgrims were the ones who lived in the northern part up around the Sea of Galilee, instead of walking down the west bank through what they call Samaria. Now, all you guys in here, Samaria, and Jews avoided the Samaritans, pretty much. They called them half-breeds, mongrels, and I've got some notes on that here in a minute. We'll get there. And it was inhabited by half-breeds. And that's what the Jews thought about Samaria, that territory, that section on the west side of the River Jordan. And it was originally set aside for that area. That territory covers the area. It was when the 12 tribes divided up the Holy Land, Manasseh and Ephraim. And I'm sure some of y'all remember Manasseh and Ephraim were whose sons? Joseph. Right. Now, what I find, this is going back from memory. I didn't study down on this, but if somebody wanted to go, I'm sure there might be a lesson in it, is if I remember right, Joseph, he didn't marry a Jewish woman, did he? No. So these guys were half Jewish anyway to start with. So I don't know. It seems in the Bible, I'm sure there's a reason it's there. I don't know the lesson behind that. It might be something interesting in the future to study that one. But it just seems strange to me that Manasseh and Ephraim were half Jewish, and in that territory that was set aside for that area, it was set aside for them. Now it's a territory known for half-breeds. And the reason it ended up like that is during them times of occupation, we was talking about earlier about Assyria, Babylon, Persia, and the Assyrians, the first ones, had these practices of bringing foreigners in and transplanting them in your land after they took over. And of course, they'd haul some of your better people, younger people off and, make soldiers out of them or whatever they did, So, and what was left ended up intermarrying with some of these foreigners in there. So that's how they end up. And what you got to realize, they had a different view there too in Samaria. A lot of this is coming back. I could sit here and look at my notes and get it, but they thought that the Messiah was going to return at a mount there in Samaria and not in Jerusalem. It was Mount Gerizim. So that was something else that further infuriated the Jews, that they wanted their own. They thought the Messiah would come back there one day. Let's see. Yeah, and the reason they thought that was because from Joshua's time, I think he initially set up a place of worship there. Joshua did back in the early days. And they also had their own version of the 5 books of Moses. And so, they're acting kind of pretty different from what the regular Jew is, and that's what the animosity, and they call them half-breeds and all that. And of course, we talked about the Assyrians transplanting the people. Another bad thing about this area, if y'all remember King Ahab, he built a temple to Baal there. And after the first time, the Syrians came the first time, hauled a bunch of them off. Well, anyway, they made them mad. They come back again, and then they finished it off. And they really messed it up. And after that was done, Herod the Great, he rebuilds and dedicates the town, and he calls it Sebaste or something like that. But anyway, it was a tribute. Now here's this Herod the Great again, and how he was able to he knew what the Romans liked. He dedicated and named that town that to Caesar Augustus. Anyway, it got rebuilt under Herod the Great, and we know Jesus had been through Samaria already, because what did Jesus do in Samaria? Who was it he healed? Had a couple of instances in there, I believe. He met the lady at the well, right? Yeah, that was one. And I'm drawing a total blank on the other, but it seems like there was another one. Or maybe I'm just getting the story of the Good Samaritan mixed up too. When Jesus taught this stuff, he kind of I guess he kind of rocked everybody's world around there when he would say stuff like good stuff about the Samaritans or something like that. It was pretty, to the Jews, it was pretty, uh, it kind of messed them up a little bit. And another thing about Samaria, if you go back and read the time he was there, I believe he was more well received in Samaria, the place of the half-Jewish people, than he was in his own hometown of Nazareth. I don't think they threatened to run him out of town or stone him or anything in Samaria, did they? But they didn't seem to care much for what he had to say in Nazareth. So, and then I made my notes here. I just wanted to mention to my class, I got onto it just a minute ago, that now that we know Jesus, he's been going to all these different places. I wanted to put the Sea of Galilee in the north. That's the northern part of the country. The Dead Sea at the bottom. So if you can kind of picture, if you've got just a vague picture of the country of Israel in your mind, you guys can look at it like that. And the east bank of the Jordan River, and just look at it, the Jordan River connects the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. And over this over this distance is like 100 and some miles. And let's say if we were here, let's say if Antioch Baptist Church is the Sea of Galilee, and we wanted to head south to the Dead Sea, we would have to go all the way about to Macon. I think that's about 9,800 miles down there, something like that. So Jesus is covering, to put it in your mind in a real place, a country and a size and an area. He's traveling by foot from an area vaguely the distance from here all the way down to Macon, Georgia. And points in between is where, the miracles occur and the teaching and so forth like that. And these territories in between that were set up by the Romans, they were two on the east side of the Jordan. So if you was standing here and looking down at Macon, and on your left side, you're going to have, if you was looking down the Jordan River, you have Decapolis would be the first territory, and then Perea was right south of that. And if you're looking, and if to your right, you're going to have what I call the meat of the country, and just right beyond it's the Mediterranean Sea. So you got the Mediterranean Sea, and what I call the main part of the country of Israel. You got the River Jordan, and you got Galilee in the north, the territory, Samaria kind of next, and then at the bottom, Judea. So, and of course, Judea, that's where Jerusalem is. That's the main capital. Well, in that northern part, Samaria there is where they had this second capital after the kingdom was divided. And the distance, I wanted to just kind of put it to my class so they know, we never talked about this much when we was talking about Jesus. I spent a good time around the Sea of Galilee, and it always pictured in my mind, they would be out on a boat and the storm would come. And to give you an idea of how big the Sea of Galilee was, it's 13 miles long and about 8 miles wide. So that's substantial. I mean, if you're on a boat, I guess I'd call it about like a dinghy back in them days, not really a big boat or anything. So, when Jesus would when he calmed the storm and stuff, you out in the middle of a lake, it's 8 miles wide. It's substantial. I think it's pretty scary. And I'm sure they didn't have all the modern life-saving equipment that you do now. I mean, if you was out in the middle of that 4 miles away from shore, that'd be a long way to swim. I'm sure there's some people that can do it, but I'd hate to know I had to do it in a storm. And then on down to the Dead Sea, 39 miles long, about 9 miles wide, and we already said from the length of the country from sea to sea is about 100 miles, and then the Galilee down to Jerusalem was about 70 miles. So now I've got my class kind of caught up where I feel like on how we are in relation to the size of the country and locations of places and moving around. We'll get on into chapter 10, verse 1, and I'm not. When I was studying this, I had some commentary there, and it said that Jesus used paradoxes, 5 of them in this chapter, to kind of make a point or learn a lesson. And what I learned out of paradox is a contradiction that ends up making a true statement. And of course, I had to study that. Being the simple minded I was, I never used the word paradox. But when I found out that was a definition, and like when Jesus says, two shall be one, that's a paradox. How can two be one? That don't sound right. But when you're dealing with marriage, yeah, it's two shall be one, man and a woman, each one, and it's not to be separated. And that's where we're headed at here in this chapter. And so I'm gonna read I've read verse 1. I'll read verse 2. Like I said, you have to bear with me. My glasses, I have to take them off. So Jesus in the crowds headed through Perea, and we're thinking maybe because the ones that are there to take that route, because they don't want to go through Samaria because they don't like the Samaritans over there. And the Pharisees came to him and asked him, "Is it lawful for a man to put away his wife, tempting him?" And they're tempting him. And by now, my class has become familiar with Pharisees, of course, and as everybody else in here. And these guys know the Bible, or what I call the Bible, Old Testament, and not the New Testament, but they know the Scriptures word for word. I'd say they could probably read it. They probably got it remembered and can quote it back to you backwards and upside down, sideways. I mean, they know their stuff. And these guys asking Jesus a question now, do we really think they're wanting an honest answer here by the way this is laid out? No. They're tempting him is what they're doing. And at this time, just like probably for a long time, even since Moses' time, this divorce issue is, it causes division. You're going to have different ideas on what's right and what's not right. So they think they're setting Jesus up here to make a wrong answer. He's probably going to answer one way or the other. And in doing so, if it's a divided issue, which it is, you've got two sects of the Jewish believers here. It has their own opinions, and I'll look at my notes here, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And if Jesus answers it, one side's going to be happy, of course, but guess what? The other side is not going to be happy. And I think it's the general thought that everybody who studies this, that they're trying to set Jesus up here to make somebody mad or offend somebody so that maybe he could be arrested. And what better place to do this if you're a Pharisee and you don't like Jesus than to get him arrested in Perea, where Herod Antipas is in charge. And we know what he's capable of. They invaded John the Baptist. So, they're up to no good here. The Pharisees are definitely up to no good. And, okay, we got that, and they were already divided. One sect, yeah, I got some notes here on it. One side, and only divorce, if some kind of sexual immorality was involved, that they justified divorce with that. And then you had the other group allowing divorce for all kinds of reasons. They interpreted the words. If you go back into the Old Testament, I forget if it's Deuteronomy or which one, but it's uncleanness. They called it, and of course they had their ideas about the way they wanted to interpret stuff, and they could call uncleanness if you burnt your husband's dinner, I guess, or something like that, would be a reason for divorce. But anyway, they're trying to set Jesus up here for that. And so I'm going to read verse 3. And he answered and said unto them, "What did Moses command you?" So in Jesus' fashion, he didn't fall for their trap. He already knew what was going on. And, it's about time to go, ain't it? I better quit. You'll just have to tell me. I get to talking and I forget. But anyway, I'll be back next Sunday if y'all can endure one more week. And then Lamar will be back. And then we can get some real teaching. But anyway, I'll, Brother Larry, would you dismiss us from our class with a prayer, please, sir? Amen. Oh, you're welcome.